In 1923, Glasgow was shaken by a name that would echo through history: Susan Newell. A story of hardship, suspicion, and a trial that would mark the end of an era. But before we start, make sure you like and subscribe and comment where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring you more stories like this. So get ready as we uncover the case of Susan Newell.
June 20th, 1923. A Wednesday evening in Coatbridge, Scotland, about 8 miles from Glasgow. 13-year-old John Johnston was delivering newspapers door to door. He was a schoolboy, earning pocket money. He knocked on doors, handed over papers, collected payment. Around 6:45 in the evening, he knocked on the door at number 2 Newland Street. Susan Newell answered. She invited him inside. John Johnston never left that house alive. Susan Newell was born Susan McAllister in 1993 into grinding poverty. Her early life was miserable. She married young and had a daughter, Janet MacLeod, born around 1915. During the First World War, her husband was killed. She was left a widow with a young child to raise alone. Life was hard. Money was scarce. She struggled to survive. By 1922, Susan had remarried. Her second husband was John Newell, an ex-serviceman who worked as a tube worker on the Glasgow subway. The three of them, Susan, John, and 8-year-old Janet, lived in a single rented room at number 2 Newland Street in Coatbridge. It was a modest existence. The rent was paid when John had work. When he did not, they struggled. The marriage was turbulent from the start. John Newell was a drinker and a womanizer. He spent money they did not have. He chased other women. Susan had a violent temper. The couple fought constantly. Neighbors heard shouting, crashing, the sounds of physical violence from both sides. In 1923, during one particularly heated argument, Susan attacked John. She left his face bloody and bruised. He reported the assault to the local police station. Officers took his statement, but did nothing further. Domestic disputes were considered private matters. The police were reluctant to intervene. Shortly after that incident, John Newell packed his bags and left. He walked out on Susan and Janet. He later claimed he went to Haddington looking for farm work. He said he needed to get away, to find employment, to escape the constant fighting. Whatever his reasons, he was gone. Susan was left alone with her daughter in that single rented room with no income and no way to pay the rent. On the evening of June 20th, John Johnston knocked on Susan Newell's door. He was delivering the evening paper. He asked for payment. Susan either did not have the money or refused to pay. An argument began. What exactly was said, nobody knows. There were no witnesses to the verbal exchange, but at some point, the situation turned violent. Susan Newell strangled John Johnston. She grabbed him by the throat and squeezed until he stopped breathing. The attack was brutal. The autopsy later revealed that his windpipe had burst from the force. Part of his skull had collapsed from blows to his head. Susan had beaten him as well as strangled him. 13-year-old John Johnston died on the floor of that rented room. When Janet MacLeod came home, she found her mother with a dead body. Susan told her daughter what had happened. Then she forced Janet to help her. Together, they wrapped John Johnston's body in a brightly colored quilt. They tied it tightly with rope. Susan tried to hide the body under the floorboards, but the space was not large enough. The body would not fit. She needed another plan.
The next morning, June 21st, Susan and Janet carried the bundle downstairs. They placed it in a go-kart, a small hand-pushed cart used for transporting goods. Susan made Janet sit on top of the bundle to keep it steady and to make it look less suspicious. Then they began walking. They were heading to Glasgow, 8 miles away. Susan planned to dump the body somewhere in the city where it would not be traced back to her. They walked for hours. The journey was long. The bundle was heavy. Eventually, a lorry driver saw them on the road. He felt sorry for the woman and child struggling with the cart. He stopped and offered them a lift. Susan and Janet climbed into the back of the lorry with the go-kart. The driver took them all the way to Duke Street in Glasgow. When they arrived, the driver helped unload the go-kart. As he lifted it down, the bundle shifted. The quilt came loose slightly. A small foot became visible at one end. At the other end, John Johnston's head, covered in burns to his scalp and ears, became clearly visible. The lorry driver did not notice, but a woman watching from her window did. The woman could not believe what she was seeing. She called to her sister. Together, they watched as Susan Newell pushed the go-kart down Duke Street. They followed at a distance. They met a man on the street and told him what they had seen. He went to find a policeman. Susan pushed the cart into the close of a tenement building at number 650 Duke Street. The close was a covered passageway leading to the back courtyard. She planned to leave the body there and escape, but the two women who had been following her appeared at the entrance. Susan panicked. She tried to lift the bundle over a wall to hide it in the yard beyond. She could not manage it alone. She grabbed Janet and tried to climb the wall herself to escape. Police Constable Thomas McGennet arrived. He saw Susan trying to scale the wall. He saw the bundle on the ground. He saw the foot sticking out of the quilt. He arrested Susan Newell on the spot. When officers unwrapped the bundle, they found the body of John Johnston. He had been dead for approximately 24 hours. He was still wearing his school clothes. His pockets contained 9 pence, about 4 pence in modern currency. That was all the money he had earned from delivering newspapers that evening. Susan was taken into custody. She was charged with murder. At first, she claimed her husband John had killed the boy. She said he had forced her and Janet to dispose of the body. She insisted she had nothing to do with the killing. It was all John's fault. The next day, June 22nd, John Newell handed himself in at a police station. He had heard about the arrest. He knew Susan was blaming him. He provided an alibi. He said he had been in Haddington looking for farm work. He had booked into a lodging house. He had witnesses who could confirm his whereabouts, but police did not believe him. They charged him with murder alongside his wife. Susan appeared at the police court in Tobago Street. Large crowds formed outside. The case had gripped the public. A woman pushing a dead child's body through the streets in a go-kart for 8 miles. It was shocking. It was horrifying. Newspapers covered every detail. Witnesses came forward saying they had seen Susan pushing the cart towards Glasgow. The publicity was immense. On June 23rd, John Johnston's funeral took place. The community mourned. He was a schoolboy. He had been delivering newspapers to earn pocket money. He had done nothing wrong. He had knocked on a door and asked for payment, and Susan Newell had killed him for it. The trial opened on September 18, 1923, at the High Court in Glasgow. Lord Allness presided. Both Susan and John Newell were charged with murder. The prosecution presented their evidence. The autopsy results showed John Johnston had been strangled so brutally his windpipe had burst. He had been beaten over the head so hard that part of his skull had collapsed. Multiple witnesses testified they had seen Susan pushing the go-kart through the streets. The lorry driver confirmed he had given her a lift. The woman who watched from her window described what she saw. Police Constable McGennet testified about arresting Susan as she tried to escape over the wall. Susan's defense lawyer attempted to argue that she was of unsound mind. He claimed she could not be held responsible for her actions because she was insane. The prosecution brought Professor John Glaister, a renowned forensic expert, to testify. Glaister examined Susan and concluded she was entirely sane. She knew what she had done. She knew it was wrong. She had tried to hide the body. She had tried to escape. Those were the actions of a rational person trying to avoid punishment, not the actions of an insane person. John Newell's alibi held up under examination. Witnesses confirmed he had been in Haddington on June 20th. He had booked into a lodging house. He had been looking for work. He could not have killed John Johnston because he was not in Coatbridge at the time. The judge directed the jury to acquit him. John Newell walked free.
The charges against him were dropped. But Susan had no defense. The evidence against her was overwhelming. She had been seen pushing the body through the streets. She had been caught trying to dispose of it. Her own daughter had witnessed what happened, though Janet was not called to testify due to her age. The jury retired to consider their verdict. They returned quickly, guilty. Lord Alness donned the black cap. He sentenced Susan Newell to death by hanging. He pronounced the formal words of the death sentence. In respect of the verdict returned in your case, I discern and adjudge you, Susan Newell, panel, be carried to the prison of Glasgow, therein to be detained until the 10th day of October next, and on that date between the hours of 8 and 10 o'clock forenoon, within the walls of the said prison at the hands of the common executioner, to be hanged by the neck on a gibbet till you be dead, and your body thereafter to be buried within the walls of the said prison, and your whole movable goods are discerned to be a sheet and forfeit to His Majesty's use, and I pronounce this for doom. Susan was taken to Duke Street Prison in Glasgow to await execution. It was the same street where she had tried to dump John Johnston's body. There had not been an execution of a woman in Glasgow in 70 years. The case became known as the Go-Kart murder and the Coatbridge murder. Petitions were organized to save Susan's life. People argued that she was a woman who had been abandoned by her husband. She was destitute. She was desperate. She should not hang. But 10 months earlier, in January 1923, Edith Thompson had been hanged in England for the murder of her husband. That execution had caused national controversy. Many believed Edith Thompson was innocent. The authorities did not want to be seen as soft on female criminals. The petitions for Susan Newell were rejected. The Secretary of State for Scotland refused to grant a reprieve. The execution would proceed as scheduled. Susan Newell would hang on October 10, 1923. The executioner was John Ellis. He was known for his speed and efficiency. He had hanged Edith Thompson 10 months earlier. That execution had affected him deeply. Edith had collapsed on the way to the gallows. She had to be carried. Ellis had been disturbed by it. He would commit suicide 9 years later in 1932, still haunted by the executions he had carried out.
For Susan Newell's execution, Ellis prepared carefully. He used a leather body belt with an additional strap to go around the thighs. This had been necessary since women's skirts had got shorter in the 1920s. There was concern that skirts would billow up as the prisoner dropped through the trap door. Ellis wanted to avoid any indignity. On the morning of October 10, 1923, Susan Newell was led from the condemned cell to the gallows. She was 30 years old. She allowed Assistant Executioner Robert Baxter to strap her legs and thighs without protest. But as Ellis prepared to place the white hood over her head, Susan broke her hands free from the loose wrist straps on the body belt. She grabbed the hood and pulled it off. She shouted at Ellis, "Don't put that thing over me." Ellis made a decision. Rather than risk a struggle, he would proceed without the hood. The noose was already in place around her neck. He gave the signal, the trapdoor opened. Susan Newell dropped. Her neck broke instantly. She died within seconds. Susan Newell became the last woman to be executed in Scotland.
Her body was buried within the walls of Duke Street Prison as the sentence required. The prison continued to operate as a women's jail until it was demolished in the 1950s. Today, only a boundary wall remains. Cathedral House, a building that once served as a halfway house for prisoners released from Duke Street, now stands nearby. Some say Susan Newell's ghost haunts that building and the surrounding area. People report seeing a short woman who appears suddenly and vanishes just as quickly. Whether the stories are true or simply legend built on tragedy, the tale of Susan Newell endures. John Johnston was 13 years old when he died. He was a schoolboy delivering newspapers to earn pocket money. He knocked on Susan Newell's door and asked for payment for a newspaper. She strangled him, beat him over the head, wrapped his body in a quilt, and pushed him through the streets of Scotland in a go-kart. She forced her 8-year-old daughter to help her. She showed no remorse. She blamed her husband. When that lie was exposed, she claimed insanity. When that defense failed, she faced the gallows with defiance, ripping off the hood and refusing to be covered.
The case shocked Scotland. The image of a woman pushing a dead child through busy streets in broad daylight, sitting her own daughter on top of the corpse to hide it, was beyond comprehension. How could a mother do such a thing? How could she involve her own child in disposing of a murdered boy's body? Janet MacLeod was 8 years old when her mother forced her to help hide John Johnston's body. What happened to her after Susan's execution is unclear. She disappeared from public records. One hopes she found a better life away from the horror her mother had created. Susan Newell was the last woman hanged in Scotland. Capital punishment for women effectively ended with her execution. In the decades that followed, other women were sentenced to death in Scotland, but all were reprieved. Susan Newell stands alone as the final woman to actually face the gallows in Scottish history. The Go-Kart murder remains one of Scotland's most shocking cases, not because of the method of killing, but because of what came after. The casual way Susan Newell wrapped a child's body and pushed it through the streets. The way she forced her daughter to sit on top of it. The way she tried to blame her husband. The way she showed no remorse at trial. And finally, the way she died, defiant to the end, refusing the hood, demanding to face death on her own terms. John Johnston's murder was senseless. A boy killed over a few pennies for a newspaper. A life ended because a desperate woman lost her temper. A family destroyed by violence. And Susan Newell paid the ultimate price, becoming the last woman in Scottish history to hang for murder.